Hello, everyone. This is Ed Breniger, and welcome to the Eddie Network podcast. My guest today is Gail Boenning. She's come back for a third visit with us, and I invited her to come because of something she said in a comment to me on an email earlier this week. And we're gonna talk about kind of what it means to be a writer and some of the, I don't know how to describe it, but more of the kind of non-writing challenges of being a writer. How about that? Is that a good way of describing it?
That's a great way of describing it.
Yeah. So welcome, Gail. Glad you're here, and thank you for what you're doing. And since the last time you were with us, which was last year, tell us a little bit about the pod blog that you and Jay Armstrong have created.
First, let me say thank you for having me back for the third time. The third time's the charm, the icing on the cake. Yeah, so since we were last together, a friend of mine, Jay Armstrong, who you recently hosted on your podcast, and I, a fellow writer, we started what we call a pod blog because there's a written component and a podcast component. And that was in January, and we just posted our 20th episode, so we're
Wow.
happy with that. One of the great learnings for me, I had an awareness of this, but it has become stronger through this experience.
What's the name? What's the name?
Oh, it is called One Line, One Love.
Yeah, thanks.
Is that we start out with a particular sort of enthusiasm for a specific direction, but it is important to leave room for evolution and change. And so we started out with a heavy focus on interviewing authors about the craft of writing. And I think maybe our first 17 or 18 episodes had that focus. And now we've transitioned a little bit to shorter conversations between Jay and I about the craft of writing, where we are taking a piece of writing from somebody who, like, I don't want to use the word popular, a well-known piece of writing that people might have experience with. We did Robert Frost's poem, The Road Not Taken. We touched on Natalie Babbitt's Tuck Everlasting. We're taking a line from that and then looking at things like strong verbs or cliche or metaphor. And our real hope is that fellow writers, readers, or really anybody who might listen will have some sort of life takeaway in the language that they use in communicating with others.
And that's fantastic. And I like what you're doing. And I like the fact that you were free to change your direction.
Mm.
And you're also an author of several books. So kind of give us an idea of what those are.
Yeah, thank you so much for asking. I did not start out with an intention of being an author. I just wrote. I signed up for a challenge to write 100 naked words per day. At the time, I was not a writer or a content creator. I'm not even sure that I recognized I was creative at that time. But what it did was give me an opportunity to start taking my thoughts and getting more clear with what was happening in my own mind by putting them in written form. And so my first book is called Wandering Words, and it's a collection of essays that I had written over a number of years. The second book is called Meandering Muses, and it takes a little creative turn, speaking through the voice of three muses, which are parts of my personality. The third book I gave a stab at fiction. And the fourth book that we talked about in our last conversation is called POISE, Facing Cancer with Grace and Resilience. And it is about my diagnosis, treatment, and cure from triple negative breast cancer.
Yeah, and they're all great books, and I highly recommend you read them all. And I think that's great. But what we want to talk about is this experience of being a writer. And I need to find the let me pull up the chat. Um, you wrote me, carried the pebble on my walk. Yes, the content, the contradiction, and hypocrisy. Here's the thing, this recognition has me searching for my own hypocrisy in the social media circus. Beneficial. What were you thinking when you wrote that to me? We were talking about a young poet that we had been reading, and just kind of talking about where her writing was taking her, and what, that sort of thing. And that's not really what we want to talk about. But more about this sense of contradiction, this thing within us that we enter into the social media space, and we may feel a sense of hypocrisy and from what we're doing. What are you thinking there?
I think that we live in an incredibly content-rich world. And I have a recognition that through my own email box and my own desire to not miss things, to hop onto a social media platform and see what's going on there, I have a recognition that a lot of us might be missing some of the beauty and awe and wonder in the world outside of our computers and these little mini computers that we carry in our pockets. And yet, it is the world that we live in. As a writer, I have a strong desire to share my observations, and the internet makes it possible to do that in a very quick way. For many years, I was writing daily posts. I recently stopped, in part because of this recognition that I'm just throwing this content into the world. And I'm taking a step back, and I'm writing more intentionally to publish a work of some kind, be a book. And so this particular young poet that we were talking about was touching on this idea of the phones and how they have not only affected you and I, Ed, but the younger generation who has grown up with them as part of living, breathing, eating. And I think it's really interesting to have an intergenerational conversation about that, and not where it's taking us, but where we want to take it. I have a recognition that as creators, we are creating our lives and we have a choice. And even though we've got maybe not the best habits around our devices, we're the only ones who can change that.
It's very true. It's very astute of you to see that. I mean, of course, others see it as well, but it feels like you see it in a much more positive sense, that there's a value to the phone, or there's value to the internet, the value to social media, but it really is its value. It has to be determined by our own set of values. Can't be because it's there. It has to be something we choose, and maybe when we're scrolling, we're making some choices, but more than not, that's not really decisions about values. It's more a decision about boredom, maybe. But it's this idea that what intrigued me about what you had written was this idea that we're, in our participation in creating the content, that there's some kind of hypocrisy, or there's some kind of disingenuousness there that we're participating in, and that there's it's not absolute in any sense, but more something that's a conflict within our own hearts and our own minds as to what we do. And I wonder if there's a positive way of looking at that.
The way that I would look at it from my experience is that being a content creator And the comments that I have received on my stories, posts, blogs, love letters, or comments that I have made on other people's work, it's like a mirror. It's like the poem that we both heard that young woman read. It gives us an opportunity to reflect and to choose what we value. And so to make that more concrete, and hearing this young woman talk about how their generation, she feels, didn't have a choice about the phones, you know, that they were part of her life from young on. What I would say to her if I were to be able to have a conversation is that, yes, that's true. It may have been a part of your growing up, but now that you have the awareness, what are you going to do with that awareness? And I think that a lot of times, myself included, especially before I started writing, I tended to think that life happened to me. I did not recognize how much of a role I have in creating my own life. And if that's the only message that I get across to others through my whole writing life, I will consider that a success. Like, to have that recognition that through your choices, you are creating your life.
I think that's really true. I think your choices um, create goodness, but also creates conflict. I mean, it's not like it's not one or the other. It's a mixture of all of that, and how we respond to our own choices is a part of the challenge of being mature adult people. You know, I look at um, my social media life, and I look at a lot of stuff. I mean, a lot of stuff, and I rationalize it as, oh, I'm learning about people who are not like me, and that's certainly true. But how much do I need to know in order to have that knowledge? And so there's something fascinating, there's something about the little shiny thing that is constantly attractive that draws me in. And I'm constantly aware of that I need to put more boundaries on that. So boundaries is really the kind of the term that I think is appropriate, because there's the observant side of my social media life. Then there's the creative side of my social media life. And the podcast I do, the Eddie Network podcast, is my creative side, and the Substack that I write is the creative side. And in that case, I'm really seeking to do what you described, which is help people become more responsible about their lives, and be able to identify how they can make a difference that matters. So it's a difficult thing. Could could I be as good at this if I didn't spend all the time looking, scrolling through Instagram and YouTube and LinkedIn and all, Facebook? Um, it's I don't know that it's a I think we're still in virgin territory, so in the sense of trying to understand the social media's effect upon us.
To add a little bit to the contradiction, a long time ago, I read an article that said that cell phones are like the cigarettes of the 1960s and 70s, right? It's your way of avoiding contact. If you're on a bus or waiting in the airport or something, you can avoid connecting with others by looking at your phone. And that left an impression on me, and an awareness that the Gail of, let's say, 10 years ago wouldn't have probably smoked, but I would have used the phone as a mechanism to not engage, because I have introverted tendencies, shy, and over the last 10 years, here's the contradiction. The internet has helped me to grow from that small person who hid to somebody who can be here having this conversation with you today or giving other online presentations. I now embrace getting together with strangers where I used to be fearful of it. And so the internet, even though it's big and there's all this content, is also just laden with opportunities for us to outgrow our limiting beliefs.
I think that's really true. I think it's really true. And I think we have to be people who provide an alternative. Like I was in a diner yesterday eating breakfast. I was by myself, and I had a paper that a friend had written, and I was reading through it. I was gonna, do some edits on it, send him some thoughts, and this couple walks in and sits in the booth in front of me. His back is to me. She's sitting facing me, and they both were hunkered down watching their phones. And I was thinking about him. I'm saying, here's this attractive woman that somehow is attached to you, and you're ignoring her. What is she thinking about you in that regard? And and she didn't seem to be that interested in what she was finding on her phone. He was almost uh, motionless in his attention, and she had a lot more motion, as if she was bored in looking at it. And she really, and if I had been so inclined, I probably would have started a conversation with him, just to kind of break that pattern. And so I think that for us as writers, I think being able to write is a way of breaking that pattern, because we're creating something that others will scroll into and watch or read. But in that sense, that's there's some value to that. There's a value if they will take the time. I mean, in some cases, my podcast goes an hour. So if if they're willing to take an hour to listen or watch the thing, then I'm all for that. And I haven't gone to the point of creating clips from my videos, um, mostly because I don't have time to do that. But I think that, I guess the other thing to say is that I think we should be also careful not to um, be overcritical of ourselves in this regard, because we're the first generation to have this technology, and we will not be the last generation. There'll always be some version of this technology, and people will learn to treat it differently than what we have treated, because we didn't. I mean, I'm thinking about I was thinking about my childhood and how we didn't even watch TV that much. And, I listened to the radio, but that was different than what we have today. I mean, it's the world continues to change. And um, I think just having that pebble in your shoe, as you describe it, which is to remind us that we're people that need to be careful with our words, but also careful with our time and careful with what we look at. That's important.
So the poet that started this conversation and what made me see a contradiction was her poem about the phones. But then I followed her account and I see that she has hundreds of thousands of followers, and she is a content producing machine, right? So
Right.
she maybe is or is not aware of the contradiction within herself. And one of the things I love about the idea of intergenerational conversation, and I'm aware that you have modeled this here on your podcast. In particular, I remember your conversation with a young 20-something philosopher from Denmark, is that we don't know what we don't know. And so sometimes for the younger generation to hear from an older generation or vice versa can just really open a window of perception and experience and actual personal change or evolution. And I have become, where I used to avoid things I didn't like, I have become very cognizant of engaging with things I do not like, because it does open those windows for me. That those feelings, those uncomfortable feelings, are often the ones that help us to grow the most.
And does that get represented in your writing?
I feel like when I was writing the Three Muses Merge blog, it was told through the point of view of three muses. Urania was my logical brain muse, and perhaps her opinions were the strongest about how the world should work. And then there was Talia, who was my heart muse, who, was very spontaneous, and she could be very loving, but she could also get very angry, right?
Yeah.
And then there was Calliope, who's the bridge between the two. And she was the real anchor between too much order and too much chaos. And so I think through those three voices, being aware of what was happening in my head and my heart, by seeing myself and becoming clear on what I value and what I want to share with others. Do you have some sort of version of that happening within yourself, Ed?
Yes. I'm trying to make sense of what I see. And I'm asking questions. And I've recognized that my personality is one that pushes back on things that are kind of presented as, well, this is the default way we should look at things. And so in that sense, I've always been an outsider. And that has been helpful as a content creator, because I'm always seeing things from an outside perspective. The challenge has been to see that my outside perspective is actually the inside perspective of me, and it's that I have to be more self-aware about what I'm saying. That's been true, and not assume that what I'm saying is the right thing to be said at the time, or is accurate, or things like that. There is I don't have three muses. I certainly have two, and I would describe them more in terms of there's this highly analytical side to my thinking that allows me to analyze things pretty significantly. Can be very objective, looking at something, observing something, listening to something, reading something. But at the same time, there's this highly intuitive side to me, which, if we take the science and the philosophy into account, what that's really saying is that I'm highly embodied in the real world. I'm experiencing the real world through my body, and I am trying to make sense of what I'm feeling, and um, and so I'm trying to make sense of that by being more analytical at times, but sometimes it's about being more really searching what my feelings are and why am I feeling this way, and trying to make sense of, say, things that people have said to me that to me don't make sense or seem to be strange. There may be critical statements that have been made to me. And so I'm feeling that and feeling that uncomfortableness, while at the same time I'm analyzing it and trying to make sense of it so I can respond appropriately. I guess what I'm saying is that those two things work well together for me, but it's taken a long time to get there, and uh, and I'm not certain I actually understand it as well as I just articulated it. But it's I guess it's I guess when I'm looking at what I'm writing, I'm writing about things that I'm trying to make sense of. So I'm thinking my I'm analyzing what my body embodied feelings are. What am I experiencing in the context of this situation so that I can make sense of it and then draw upon, well, I read this before and I read that, and that I'm going to pull these pieces and kind of construct some kind of soup or something that has a kind of taste to it that is really satisfying because all these flavors blend together really well. But I would say that that because of this, it has made it more difficult to actually be in relationship with people because I am so attuned to all these things that it makes it more difficult to actually have a normal relationship because I'm always in the process of thinking stuff through, always trying to make sense of it, always trying to, and I'm not trying to be over controlling, but there's an aspect of that where it is, and so it's and a lot of that is because there's purpose and there's meaning and there's mission and there's direction that's flowing through all of that, that's driving me to write the future of leadership, or do a podcast, all these things, because there's this thing inside of me that's driving me to care for people and desire for them to figure out who they are and how they can make a difference that matters in their world. So it's all those things come together in one place, and where I am right now is as I've actually written very little in the past year. If you look at 2022, I wrote over 200,000 words. And in the last year, I probably have not written 30,000 words. Hardly any. Now, does that mean I don't have anything to say? No, it means that I'm trying to sort through what I'm experiencing to try to understand what it is I need to say. And that was a concession, I guess, to having kind of reached some kind of transition point where, okay, I've now gone through and worked through all this stuff, and that's done. Now where do I go from here? And that's where it's taken me to this point. And so I've just thought a lot, thought without doing much writing or even note taking. Just, I'll just have a piece of paper and I'll write a box and I'll put a word in it, another box, put another word in it, and and over a period of a month, there'll be these little lists that show up on this piece of paper, and they'll just be, oh, I heard something, and I'll just write something down, just fragments of thought. And for me as the writer, this is not just looking for something to write. This is actually writing as the craft of knowing myself and allowing myself the room to grow or to develop. That's a long description that that long description is actually very much like what I'm going through on a regular basis, because I'm actually searching to understand what it is that I'm experiencing. That makes sense?
It does. I was right along with you. Some parts I felt like were very synergistic. Like I felt the same things. I have a comment and a question. The comment is another recognition of the beauty of the World Wide Web. So you mentioned you wrote a lot in 2022. And that is the year that we met each other. And we met each other because I have been part of a workshop where I met a woman named Sue Hetherington, and she made mention of your writing in her blog. And I followed that mention and read your post, and we connected over comments. So in that way, the internet, the World Wide Web, has really given us a gift to communicate with others where we see connection points that we would not have had before. So I am so grateful for that.
Me too.
My question would be, as part of what you were saying, we were talking about emotion, and it has me thinking about something I read where somebody recently said, like, emotions, we tend to think of emotions as bad or good. Like we might label anger or sadness as bad emotions. This particular writer said, you can't attach bad or good to any emotion. They all serve a purpose. So my question for you is, you use the word respond. When you are having one of those emotions like sad, confused, angry, do you ponder on that and then tend to respond through your writing?
Yeah, very definitely. You know, and for whatever reason, and I don't necessarily have a reason for anything. I mean, I do have reason for some things, but for example, um, death is a very deep thing for me. It's touching, tender. Um, Maybe it's because my mother died when I was, in my mid-20s. Maybe it is because our family has been so tight as a family intergenerationally that when someone dies, it really means something. It's a real loss. Um, and so when I encounter a story about death, or I encounter um, someone who tells me a story, or I see a depiction of that in a show, I'm not traumatized by that. I'm just I recognize that there is a loss that has happening in that moment that um, that requires um, both an affirmation of the person that died and a recognition of that there is something that we lose when they pass away. And so, for example, being now a retired Presbyterian minister, since 2010, I've done um, 5 funerals of members of my family, and every one of those were difficult to do, but also a privilege to do, because it was in a very real sense a way to affirm and validate and express gratitude for this life that is no longer with us, regardless of what they experienced in life, to be grateful for that life because of what that person meant to us as a member of our family. And I think that that's a part of my emotional DNA, that one thing that allows me to see things in the world that take on the character of loss. I mean, you hear people in like my age bracket who talk about the loss of freedom that they had as children, because then there was safety. You could. I mean, my parents would let me leave the house at 7 in the morning and I'd come home at 7 till at night, and they never thought about where I was. And we didn't have phones. We didn't have, we didn't have a lot of the things that the kids have now. And so we feel, so many of the people my age feel that there's some kind of loss that is attributed to that. And they don't like things like social media. They don't participate, or if they do, it's at a very simple level of kind of checking in on Facebook to see, where their friends had lunch today. I mean, it's at that kind of level. So they're not planning on making money off the internet. They're just planning on staying connected to their friends, which is fun. So I think that sense of loss that many people feel, they feel in other ways. And I think, say, people who are, say, Gen Xers or Gen Zers or now Gen Alpha also experience loss, and may not have the experience or the know-how to deal with those losses. So I see that what I'm going through that is so emotional, in one particular way of dealing with loss and death, is a way for me to connect with people in the real world at the point of the things that they feel a sense of loss, and that sorrow and that sadness has a binding effect upon us. So in a sense, we can create community around the sense of loss that we have. That's one of the things I see emerging in my own experience of dealing with people on social media, is that we're not being attracted. We don't join together because we have happy things going on. We really join together because we're looking for someone to share in the sadness or the sorrow or the suffering that we may feel in life.
I feel like through your share there, you just touched on another really incredibly powerful benefit of the internet. And when I grew up, and probably you grew up, we had our media channels, right? We had 3 channels on our TV, and we were all getting the same kind of programming, and generally it was very wholesome, right? That has shifted, and we tend to see, or I tend to see, mass media as promoting separation more than bridges between people. And there's a lot said about how that perhaps happens through algorithms also, with what you are fed on social media, what shows up in your feed. But there's nothing to say that you cannot choose to step outside of that feed and look for something else, which is, I think, kind of what happened, how you and I met each other. You can look for connection instead of division, and that is a conscious choice. And the internet can allow you to connect with anything, right? You can learn how to paint, you can learn how to fix your car, you can join a book club, and it's all mostly free, and it's an internet connection away. So that, I think, is a positive way of looking at what's available to us that we didn't have before.
I agree with you, but it's there again, it's a choice. And I mean, I know you've watched some of these podcasts and you've been on some of the podcasts. There's a technique that I use in these podcasts, which I think is probably largely invisible. But I'm listening for that person to say something that triggers a question in my mind. And it may be a word that they use. It may be a phrase. It may be a story. It may be something. Maybe that they describe their job that they've been doing in a particular way that, to me, sounds different than expected. It's something incongruous, something um, out of balance, something different. And so I'm going to ask a question about that, and that takes us down a trail that would not have we would not have gone down unless something in me had triggered a question which asked them to go in a direction that they didn't expect. And that is the sort of thing which people are responding to as I really like that. I liked the fact that we didn't follow the norm. It was that there was this unscripted nature to this. And I think that that's, if we take our internet viewing or social media viewing in the same way, we see things, we're scrolling through, we see something, we say, I want to learn more about that. So we go into the search bar and we put that word and we search for that. I mean, I do that all the time. And it takes me down into places that I would never go otherwise. And so I think the prior thing that we need is to be curious, and curious about ideas, curious about things, but mostly curious about people.
And I feel like what you shared as an interviewer, as a podcast host, that you do in asking these sorts of questions, I think we all want to be seen and heard for our unique flame inside and not our sameness. And for you to recognize that in another, or for any of us to give somebody that opportunity. I have really tried to stay away. I can hear myself in my own brain jumping up and down saying, don't ask that question. What do you do? Like, that used to be my standard question when I would meet somebody new. And it's really hard for me to not ask that question. Like, there was something on Instagram once that gave a whole list of other questions you could ask, where you can touch the person instead of the job, or you can touch on a similar point of interest. What movie have you seen recently that you like? How are you reading something? And instead of what do you do? And I think that you offer that to your guests here on your podcast.
Well, let me just say this is another one of those places where we need to be kind to ourselves. I think it's okay to ask, what do you do? Because they're going to say, well, I do this. Embedded in their answer is going to be a trigger to something that's about them. So it may be the simplest way to get into that is to say, so what do you do? I say, well, I'm a writer, or I'm a, and I've been thinking about this thing, because how do I describe myself? I've been saying I'm a leadership guy forever, because that's the most generic thing I could say. And and only over the last week or 10 days, I've been toying with the idea of say, well, and you can laugh if you want to. I'm a social media content creator.
Oh. And you are.
I am, but I have not identified myself like that. But that's what I am. And so what distinguishes me from one of these content creators who has millions of followers, and they're making millions of dollars off of YouTube, and that's it. What is the difference between them and what you and I are doing? That's a big question that I think we should address, because we're all on the same platforms. So is there a difference?
I don't really know. I think that really that's an individual question. I would hate to lump people together based on whether or not they have a lot of following or not. I guess my initial gut reaction, which could be wrong, is that those people with lots of followers tend to be selling something, or that's what gets them that recognition.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I suspect that you and I perhaps are using it more as a tool of exploration than to sell any one particular way of thinking or being or
Yeah,
buying.
I think that's also accurate. How concerned are you about numbers? Numbers of eyes on your.
I'm not. And I can't say that it's been 8 years since I started writing. And in the beginning, it was never really a focus on numbers. I've always been more interested in relationship building. So the comments are what I care about. And almost always when I receive a comment, I reply to it.
Same here.
My numbers are low, despite the fact that I've been writing for 8 years, but the connections I have and my personal growth is off the charts of anything I could measure. Like I am a different person, and that's what matters to me. How about you?
I'm coming up on the 20th anniversary of the beginning of my professional writing career. July 4th, 2004, my first column, business leadership column for the Asheville Citizen Times appeared, and also began my weblog. That weblog was called Leading Questions, and I began that 20 years ago. Because of, just what I was doing. About 5 years into that, I got noticed that my weblog, Leading Questions, was ranked 35th in the top 50 leadership weblogs in the world. And I was grateful for that designation. But it didn't change anything. It didn't change the number of people watching. It didn't change the number of people seeking me out for consulting help. It didn't change anything. It was, and so those numbers didn't really have an effect upon me other than I was grateful for the recognition. And so when I published my first book in 2018, the expectation was we're going to produce a bestseller. The reality was we sold 41 copies on launch day. I was disappointed because I thought we should have sold more. But I also knew because of what I was seeing by the numbers over the previous 3 or 4 months that it was not going to start well. And so it taught me that I wanted what it taught me in the analysis of why the book didn't launch well was that I had never built the audience, built the relationships for the book to launch well. I didn't have the relationships established where people were looking forward to buying the book, couldn't wait to get their hands on the book. And even all the people who knew me and loved me, they didn't even have that expectation of wanting, or about the excitement of my book coming out and wanting to have it on launch day. And so I recognize that numbers really are not a very good measure, that relationships are far more important. So I spent the following 10 months doing book events all over the country. And even that didn't build the audience. But what it did build was a stronger and deeper community of people who I now knew, who now knew me because they purchased the book. And so relationships became more and more important. And so that got translated to Substack. and this is a long description. So I took the 360 names that were on my MailChimp newsletter list when I started Substack, and I transferred them to Substack into their email list. And almost immediately, that number dropped to 335. So I lost about 25 names almost immediately. And then it kind of stayed like this for a while. This was in 2022. And then later in the year, things began to creep up to the point where I think I'm somewhere over like 930 or 925 now. And that's, in 3 years, that's I feel very good about that. And I'm hopeful of getting to 1,000 subscribers on Substack by the end of the year. So, but all of those people have chosen to follow me, and so I'm hoping that they're reading. So I think that what really matters to me is the relationship that I have with people who are readers and followers and viewers of the Substack of the podcast, and that the numbers really don't reflect value.
Okay, so you had a post that came out on Substack this morning, which I read. And in it, you talked about your recognition that that leadership is not a title. It's not CEO. It's not CFO. It like we all can lead.
Right.
Leadership is a state of mind, it's character, it's a willingness to show up and be seen.
Right.
And so I almost have a sense like somebody who has one of those astronomical follower counts, that has the potential to be detrimental because it's feeding something that we all have, our egoic self. Like I can see that being a limiting factor to grow because all of a sudden you have to be the type of person who produces this kind of content because that's what your audience wants. And in a way, I am quite grateful that I don't have many followers because I am forever trying something new. And oftentimes I don't know what Gail is going to do next. And therefore, I'm not trying to live up to somebody's expectation.
I think that's really smart. It's really smart. It's exactly what I'm doing. So, this came out, it sold 41 on the first day. So that was September of 2018. I got my quarterly spreadsheet from the publisher last week. I think it was last week. And it's the second quarter I've made money. First quarter of this year, I made, I think, $2.45, which really means that I've finally paid off all the work that went into to create the book, the publishing of the book. All of that is now paid off, and now we're at the point of making money. And then this quarter, I made, I think, $7.27. So, and I think I have to make more than $25 in order for them to send me a check, which will be great when that happens. The point being is that slow growth lasts, because you're not having all these people who follow you for a week and then they're gone. You have a chance to build an audience. You have a chance to build, and so if you put relationships at the forefront, then you have a chance to create something that's steady and long lasting. And it also means that if you do it like I've been doing it with the podcast, which is at a level where I can do all the work myself. I don't have to hire anyone. Um, I can maintain this forever because it's within my capacity to do all the work. And if I added to that, then if I added a staff person, say, to do marketing, and added a staff person to do recruiting, and added staff person to go look for advertising. If I had just had two more people, I would have to be managing them along with all the stuff I was doing. And so I'm really just happy doing what I'm doing and willing to say, I'm just going to keep it at this small level because it allows me to continue to do this thing that I love.
And there's an openness for your creativity. If you were
Yeah.
to decide that the podcast wasn't working for you anymore, you could more easily let it go to transition to something else without
Right.
having to worry about the livelihood of others.
So like there's a facet of what I want to do. I'd like to do group events, have group conversations with former guests. So have guests come, and I've done one of these, and I'm publishing, I think in 2 weeks, the one group event that I did back in the winter, and we'll see what the response is to that. But you see, that would be kind of a step in a new direction for the podcast, much like what you and Jay are doing with the things you're doing with One Line, One Love.
Yeah, and I also had the opportunity to co-host an event this week with two other ladies about the power of online connectication. And we touched on some of the things that you and I talked about today about the positive side of using the internet and growing relationships and fueling your own personal growth through curiosity. So again, there is so much opportunity. What I needed to overcome, and maybe some others listening today need to overcome, is that idea of I'm not good enough. Who am I to think that I can do this? And I don't think that that's something you can overcome in the snap of your fingers. It has taken me thousands of posts to build my self-belief and confidence to the point that I could do something like that. But taking that first step, and each time you do something new, or you say this isn't working and you pivot, you build your self-esteem in recognizing something's not working and you want to try something different.
What do you think is the source of that feeling of you're not good enough?
That's a great question. Perhaps a lot of things from childhood, growing up. I don't think anybody ever told me that I wasn't good enough or that I couldn't do something. I don't know if there is a gender component to it, if it tends to be more women than men that take on that smaller supportive role, then I can step up and do this thing. But I feel like there are a number of people like me who don't have that self-belief or confidence, and that it is something, a muscle you can certainly, it's not necessarily overcoming the outside world, it's overcoming your own inside lack of belief or fear.
Do you think that some of this comes from comparing ourselves to people that we admire?
Oh my gosh, yeah, probably. I can remember the first platform I started writing on is called Medium. And at the time, there were what I would call some popular or famous writers there, Seth Godin, who you and I both are aware of. What felt like a big deal to me, like, who am I to say something to this, well-established marketing man who runs these courses. Well, I ended up taking one of his courses and it was life transforming for me. But and now I would put a comment on there without even thinking twice about it. But 8 years ago, that felt like a big deal to me.
Yeah, he's
And
had
I
it.
also think we think people are watching when they aren't.
Yeah, I think we all feel this way. That's why I sent you that the episode that I had with Whitney McDuff, where she talks about the imposter syndrome.
Yes.
And I think it's a very real thing. And I don't think it's necessarily rational. I think it's very emotional, and it just happens to be. I mean, it's like the day that I interviewed her last year. I think I said in the interview that I was walking through the house, coming to sit down to have the interview, and I was thinking, oh, this is not going to go well, and and then she comes on and tells this story that she had heard about imposter syndrome, where, well, if you're not struggling with imposter syndrome, you're not trying hard enough. I said, yeah, that's right. Oh, the fact that I'm doing this, the only way to get rid of that is not to try at all, and that's not an answer. So I wrote her, by the way, and I said, I've used this several times the last few weeks with people, and I thought you'd like to know, and why don't you come back on and we'll talk some more about this. So we're scheduled to talk next week, and we'll have another
Oh,
podcast. She's
that,
remarkable.
that's
Well,
wonderful. I look forward to hearing your conversation with her.
me too. So why don't we kind of tie this little package up into a nice little bow and finish with what would, I don't know what we close with, but maybe we characterize um, the life of a writer from the standpoint of what is it that we hope to become if when we decide we're going to spend a lot of our days writing. What is it the hope? What is your hope for your life because you're now so committed to being a writer? If that's a awkwardly phrased, but yeah, what's your hope to emerge from the writing that you do? I guess that's the better way of saying it.
I almost hesitate to say that I have an external hope for it because I've gotten to the point now, having self-published 4 books that have sold some and have had wonderful comments from people, but have not sold a lot. In a way, I think that has been incredibly freeing for me. I now create for myself and for my own personal satisfaction and growth with a recognition that I can't really control what happens on the outside. And that's really freeing for me. The next book that I'm working on is an illustrated book. I never was an illustrator either, with poetry. Where this, had you told me 5 years ago this was going to happen, I would have asked you what you were smoking. And so I just love what writing has taught me is to listen to my inner voice and to follow it. And I have to cap that by saying I'm really fortunate in that I don't need to earn a living from it. I can do it for my personal joy, and that I'm sure makes a big difference.
That's great. I really like that.
How about you? What do you hope to see?
I hope that the I hope the effect of what I do, whether it's through writing or through the podcast, is that people realize that they can believe in themselves and go do things that are beyond what they thought they could do prior. I mean that just I mean just saying those words just then were just, filled me up. And I see that as the secret to changing the world. And and when I wrote this, I think it's in the introduction. I think it was in the introduction. Yeah, it was in the introduction. I said, let me find it. I was talking about my purpose, and my purpose was, well, let me just say it. Let me just read this to you. As I started over in almost every aspect of my life, my circle of impact model of leadership grew in significance and practicality. For two decades, my purpose was to inspire leadership initiative by living my life with integrity as one of my core values. It brought me to ask myself, what should be the measure of my impact? Is it selling a lot of books, becoming a professional speaker, or becoming a recognized expert on 21st century leadership? Each of those measures would be personally gratifying, but they are not the measure of my impact. If impact has changed, then what is the level of impact that I want to create that would make a difference, that would matter long after I pass from this earth? 1%. 1% of what? I'll know that I have achieved the impact that I seek when I see 1% of the world's population taking personal initiative to create leadership impact. That is 3.5 million people in the United States and 75 million worldwide taking action to make a difference in their local communities. The ripple effect will be a collective wisdom of learning to solve problems, create new opportunities, and create a better world from the ground up. More important to me, it means that the most insignificant person in any place, organization, or social group can, by their own actions, change the world. That's my hope.
And you're living it. You're living it through what you're doing and the guests that you bring onto your show, by letting them be seen and heard by you and whoever you share it with.
Yeah.
Increases their impact and their own self-esteem. And so probably Ed, you'll exceed that 1%, although you may never know it. Like, we can never actually see everybody we touch.
Well, two reactions to that. First was, how are you going to do that? I said, I'm not. Everybody else is going to do that. They're going to get motivated and they're going to go out and be those kinds of people. I don't have to figure out how to make that 1%. And then I had some friends in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, where I used to live, said, your goal's too small. I said, what do you mean by that? It says, you really need to 10x it. And I'm thinking 10x. So this was in 2017 when I was setting this goal. And so we're now 7 years into the future. And we were thinking, okay, so we're not 75 million, but 750 million. So 750 million people if we 10x it. I said, I'm okay with that, but I don't think it helps motivate people to think in those terms. And they said, well, you should be thinking about that. So I see that that what we're doing, our conversation here, and what you're doing, and what you and Jay are doing with your podblog and your writings, is also giving people a sense of what is possible if they give themselves to the idea that they can make a difference through some kind of creative endeavor that they take on. And it's just that one little hurdle that they have to overcome to go and write something down. I mean, people would come up to me during these book events that I was doing. They said, "Oh, I really would like to write a book." And I say, don't write a book, just write. If there's a book inside of you, it will appear, and probably will appear. But if you put the pressure on to write the book, then you'll never get it written. Just write. Write for yourself. Don't write for anybody else, and enjoy it. And I think that if people can do that, they can take something and start it, something that's creative, then they will discover something about themselves which is worth believing in.
An early mentor gave me 3 words: follow the energy. And it was right around when I started writing, and writing energized me. I found myself going through my days looking for fun or positive or beautiful things to write about. And, you know, for all of us, it might not be writing, it might not be bike riding, but there is something that gives you energy, and let that take a hold of you and let yourself grow into it.
I agree with that. I totally agree with that. So thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for who you are. Thank you for what you create. I wish you well as you work through this next book. Can't wait to see the paintings. I think we've seen some of them. Have you been showing some?
Yeah, some of them I sprinkle them around. I'm terrible in that regard. I can't keep it to myself. I can't keep a secret.
Oh, you should. Well, I think you're doing really well. I think
Thank you.
you're doing really well. And everyone, thank you for watching. Um, you know, if you have a sense that you have something to offer the world, you should offer it. You have a gift, give it. Don't let, oh, I'm not good enough, or don't let, I'm not prepared. Don't let any of those kinds of negative obstacles get in your way. You don't have to do something major. You don't have to do something big. You just have to start. Start in some way that makes sense to you. It doesn't have to make sense to anybody else. It just has to make sense to you. And try. And I think you will find that you can do things. And we're both examples of that. And so whatever challenges that you face, you know, whether it's a health challenge like you've gone through, and, you know, challenges of, you know, losing a business or having to move, or whatever those challenges may be, that's just more fuel for the energy of creation. So thank you again, Gail.
Thank you, Ed. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, it has. And we'll see you soon. And we'll see you all soon here on the Eddie Network podcast. Bye-bye.